Death at the point of a razor-tipped sword, captured and executed by the enemy on some barren frontier of the Empire, horrifically tortured for your faith, thrust into an arena to be slaughtered by ferocious wild beasts, sold into horrific slavery for your foreseeable future, or perhaps even from birth. Robbed and beaten in one of Rome's sordid maze-like alleys, living daily in overcrowded streets lined with human and animal waste and the potential for a host of fatal infections. These are just merely a few of the reasons why you wouldn't survive 24 hours in ancient Rome. Let's look at some more, shall we? Welcome to the Roman Empire. Crime. During the imperial period 27 BC to 476 AD, as Rome expanded and became more urbanized, crime became far more complex and systematic. There was an emergence of organized crime syndicates peddling vices such as gambling and money lending, prostitution, black market goods, protection rackets, and so on. Violent crime was not uncommon in Rome, particularly in areas well known for harboring unfavorable living conditions and tenants. The neighborhood of Subura, a densely populated and bustling district situated in the valley between the Esquiline, Viminal, and Quirinal hills, it was known for its narrow, sordid streets, crowded tenements, and diverse population. Subura was an established hub of taverns, brothels, and gambling dens, and was infamous for its reputation for riots and civil unrest due to the myriad of social and political discontent of its inhabitants. Period sources by Roman historians such as Livy, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Dio Cassius often include descriptions of neighborhoods like Subura and events that occurred there. Successive emperors attempted to maintain law and order through measures like the establishment of the Praetorian Guard, urban cohorts, and other law enforcement agencies. However, corruption was also rampant within these institutions, fueling their inability to correctly police the empire. Punishment for crime was varied and dependent upon both the act committed as well as the perpetrator's social status or connections. Minor offences could be punished with a fine or imprisonment, but could also be scaled up to flogging, mutilation, or branding. Exile and capital punishment were also penalties often meted out for more serious crimes by crucifixion, beheading, and even drowning. Slavery. The Roman Empire was built, developed, and thrived on the institution of slavery. By the end of the Republic in 27 BC, it is estimated that there were perhaps 2 million slaves in Italy. Historian Brian Campbell notes how, quote, Roman warfare outside Italy made the largest contribution to the supply of slaves, though banditry and piracy were also important sources, and the marketing of slaves was facilitated by the entrepreneurial activities of slave traders. Captives taken prisoner during campaigns on any of the Roman frontiers could be forced into slavery, sometimes as gladiators, land workers, menial laborers, house servants, personal servants to officers in the army, or agricultural helpers. The treatment of slaves was largely dependent upon their owners, but it is fair to imagine that for the majority, this perilous existence was unpleasant. Exploitation, abuse, and harsh living conditions would have all been daily experiences for many, with very little recourse against any mistreatment and little hope of freedom. Considered property under Roman law, slaves had no legal rights or freedoms and could be bought, sold, inherited, or potentially freed by their owners. Children born to slave parents were also automatically slaves, often knowing nothing but servitude from birth to death. Morbidly, this practice was actually encouraged by some slave owners in the hopes of acquiring even more cheap labor. The Legion. Joining the Roman army was a formidable but viable option for citizens in ancient Rome. Recruitment for the legions began as early as 14 to 17 years old, and 25 years service was expected of the individual, or until they were severely wounded or killed on campaign, whichever came first. After having sworn the legionary's oath, or sacramentum, a recruit was bound to service with the legions. Their training would be tough. Brutal physical fitness tests in the form of weighted speed marches, assault courses, and endurance runs would enable them to maintain the relentless pace required on campaign. Period sources state how a legion would be expected to, quote, march with the common military step 20 miles in 5 summer hours, and with the full step, which is quicker, 24 miles in the same number of hours, in full kit and equipment weighing around 50 to 60 pounds. Daily training with the gladius, pilum, and scutum would ensure their skill in swordsmanship and close combat, making them capable of fighting as a tight-knit unit or as part of a larger cohort. This basic training was conducted over a period of 4 arduous months. Depending on a recruit's characteristics, status, or proficiency, they could be assigned to different roles within the army, or different roles of service on warships, if they elected to join the naval forces. Standard infantry, cavalry, light infantry, artillery, and reconnaissance were just some of the roles required. So far, life in the Legion doesn't sound too taxing. Soldiers were paid, fed, and initially housed in barracks, had relative job security and purpose, and were well trained in their roles. Yet, once assigned to their legion, a legionary could expect posting to any one of the campaign countries or frontiers of the empire, stretching from Syria, Jordan, or Israel to Turkey, Greece, Africa, or Britain, and it is here that they would truly earn their pay. In order to reach these locations, endless months of route marches across unbroken, slogging terrain and treacherous journeys by sea were required. Equipment, supplies, building materials, and living quarters all had to be carried, and each night when a temporary camp was established, solid defenses had to be built, guards were posted on nightly sentry duty, and then it was all taken down and carried again the following day. Period literature states legionaries complained about the hardness of the work, and specifically about building ramparts, digging ditches, foraging, collecting timber and firewood, and all the other camp tasks that are either necessary or invented to keep the men busy. When they arrived at their designated fort, whether it be on the barren, unforgiving front line of Britannia, under a searing sun in the vast expanses of North Africa, or on the brutal plains of Gaul, all of these menial tasks and more continued, yet life for the legionary became even more dangerous. Daily camp life was now wrought with the added dangers of an army on campaign. The enemy could lead raiding parties against the fort at any minute, day or night. They could ambush a unit out on patrol or mass an army of their own to fight a set battle. Imagine trembling in a frozen field in Britannia, a cold, thick mist restricting your view so that you can only see the legionaries either side of you, and a thin strip of bleak field visible through the small gap in the defensive testudo formation. But you can hear the enemy tribesmen out there. Their war cries loud and terrifying. The clink and rattle of hundreds of swords and spears ready to hack and stab and butcher. Your hands are cold and clammy, grasping a gladius and a heavy scutum, waiting for the inevitable horror. And then you hear it. A rallying cry followed by the thunder of hundreds of running feet and the deathly screams of a charge. Religious persecution. Dependent upon your religious preference, you're also not likely to last 24 hours in the Roman Empire once they discover your faith. When the Romans adopted a host of gods to worship, and both Jewish and Christian followers refused to idolize more than their one god, this set the scene for more than 250 years of brutal and bloody persecution. Following the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, Emperor Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus saw fit to blame its origins on Christian descendants, and with them as scapegoats, he initiated a blood-spattered reign of terror upon their faith. Subject to various forms of unjust torture and execution, Christians were horrifically crucified, burnt alive, and torn apart by wild dogs in the Colosseum, whilst draped in animal skins or for public entertainment. In macabre fashion, Nero had some victims tied to poles covered in tar and set alight to illuminate his public gardens, said to be the origin of the Roman candle firework. Rumors and misconceptions about Christian practices, such as accusations of cannibalism due to the ritual of the Eucharist, their exclusive belief in one god as opposed to the polytheistic religious practices of the Roman Empire, and their refusal to take part in sacrifices to the emperor, fueled distrust amongst the general populace. As the Roman Empire reigned, and with it a succession of crazy and tyrannical emperors, so the persecution became bloodier and its methods more ghoulish. The terrifying fate of damnatio ad bestias was introduced, or condemnation to the beasts, whereby Christian victims would be forced into a public arena unarmed to be slaughtered by ravenous lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my. Dismemberment was also a popular form of execution, tying a victim's limbs to 4 separate horses and then having them whipped so that they bolt in different directions, tearing the victim apart. Being ground to death in a stone mill, roasted alive over a grill, stoned to death, being broken on the wheel, flayed by sharp metal combs, having tongues or eyes gouged out, disemboweling, and decapitation were all methods devised to inflict as much pain and fear into the empire's persecuted population. Starting with Nero, subsequent emperors Domitian, Valerian, Diocletian, and Galerius all took pleasure in the oppression of Christianity and the enforcing of cruel methods of punishment, so no matter what era of the Roman Empire, it would be difficult to remain faithful. Disease and sanitation. While there were some sophisticated sanitation systems and cultural practices that promote cleanliness in ancient Rome, perhaps most famously the practice of regular bathing, challenges such as mass overcrowding, inadequate waste management, and limited access to clean water were rife. Streets in many of Rome's neighborhoods could be dirty and crowded with an abundance of unhygienic tenements. Household and human waste, debris, and animal excrement accumulated over a short space of time, despite the practice of street sweeping amplifying the unsanitary conditions and public health risks. Roman tenements, or insulae, were similar to high-rise apartments and housed a large portion of the urban population, particularly the lower classes and slaves. Limited living space and increasing demands for housing, including migrants and immigrants of the empire, meant that there were serious pressures to accommodate the masses. As such, apartments were often small, cramped, uncomfortable, poorly ventilated, and shared by multiple families with limited access to basic amenities, such as running water, heating, or sanitary areas. These conditions then spawned further issues such as potential for fire, the rapid spread of disease, and possibly collapse or cave-in. Disease was rife in these congested neighborhoods, and infectious transmission could spread rampant and unchecked throughout insulae. Malnutrition and weakened immune systems served as prime hosts for malaria, typhoid fever, tuberculosis, leprosy, smallpox, measles, rabies, and various gastrointestinal infections. Outbreaks of disease could have devastating consequences for the urban population, leading to high mortality rates during pandemics such as the Antonine Plague, which emerged from the eastern border of the empire and resulted in the deaths of more than 5 million people and a significant number of the Roman military. And so, considering all of this and the horrific myriad of other potential risks, do you think you would last more than 24 hours in the Roman Empire? Because I know that I certainly wouldn't. Let us know in the comments below if you think you'd stand a chance. And if you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe, as it's really going to help us out in the early days of this channel. So until next Friday, I hope everyone has an amazing week, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers everyone!